I found the secret bank account my wife opened while I was terminal, and everything changed. When I opened that letter from the insurance company, I thought it was another reminder about my husband's treatment costs. I didn't expect to find her name, my own wife's, listed as a beneficiary on an account I never knew existed. It was one of those moments when the world doesn't explode, it just tilts. Everything inside you goes quiet first, before the noise comes rushing back. My name is Grace. And this is the story of how I lost my husband twice, first to illness, and then to betrayal. But it's also the story of how I learned that heartbreak, as cruel as it feels, can still plant the seed of something new. Before everything fell apart, my days were predictable in a comforting way. Morning sunlight used to sneak through the curtains at exactly 7. I'd make oatmeal with sliced bananas, because Samuel said it reminded him of his childhood, and he'd tease me for oversweetening the coffee. He was 53, an engineer by trade and a quiet man by nature. The kind of person who measured his words before speaking. I used to think that meant he was wise. Later, I wondered if it just meant he was hiding things well. We'd been married 26 years. No children, though not for lack of trying. Life had settled into a rhythm of quiet companionship. We'd talk about retirement, maybe a little place near the lake, maybe a dog. Those kinds of dreams, the simple, domestic ones that make you feel safe. That illusion shattered the day the doctor said, Stage 4. Cancer has a way of rearranging your entire world in a single sentence. At first, we tried to treat it like a project to manage. Appointments, schedules, medications, optimism, until the optimism began to fade, and the schedules became survival. He lost his appetite first. Then his hair. Then the spark in his eyes. I remember sitting beside him one night as he slept, his breathing shallow but steady. I whispered, "We'll get through this." And I meant it. Even as the nights grew longer and the hope thinner, I never imagined walking away. That's what love meant to me, staying. The hospital became our second home. I knew the nurses by name, the smell of antiseptic no longer startled me. I managed the bills, the paperwork, the endless stream of, "We're so sorry," from friends who stopped visiting after month 3. Through it all, I thought we were a team. Until the day I wasn't sure anymore. It started with a phone call. A woman from the bank called to confirm a transfer Mr. Parker had made. She mentioned his joint account with Mrs. Elaine Parker. My heart skipped. "I'm Mrs. Parker," I said automatically. The woman hesitated. "Oh. I see. Then I may have the wrong account. My apologies." She hung up quickly, but my hands were already trembling. Elaine? There wasn't an Elaine in his life, at least, not one I knew. I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe a clerical error. But a quiet, gnawing thought started growing inside me. One I didn't want to face. That night, I sat beside Samuel's hospital bed. He was asleep, his face pale against the pillow, lips slightly open. Machines hummed softly. I watched his chest rise and fall and wondered if the man I'd loved for decades was a stranger. The next morning, while he rested, I went home to get clean clothes. I told myself I was being paranoid, that grief makes you imagine things. But something pushed me toward his study, a place I hadn't really touched since he got sick. The drawers were neat, his handwriting precise on every labeled folder. Medical bills. Insurance claims. Mortgage. And then, at the bottom, one unmarked envelope. Inside were printed statements from a small regional bank. Transactions dating back almost a year. Each deposit was large, thousands at a time. Withdrawals followed, always to E. Whitman. I sat down hard on the edge of the desk. The air felt too thin. When I returned to the hospital, I couldn't look at him the same way. His frail hands, the way he smiled weakly when he saw me, I didn't know whether to cry or scream. "Grace," he whispered, "you look tired. Are you sleeping enough?" I managed a nod. The irony stung, he was dying, and he was worried about me. But that tenderness felt hollow now, like a practiced line from a man who'd already written another life somewhere else. For days, I said nothing. I needed proof. Something beyond a name and a statement. The following week, I called the bank pretending to be his assistant. My voice shook, but I stayed calm. They confirmed the account existed, listed under both Samuel Parker and Elaine Whitman. They couldn't tell me more, privacy laws, they said, but they did mention a life insurance transfer scheduled weeks before his diagnosis became terminal. That's when it hit me. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd prepared for it. Planned it. Even in death, he wanted her taken care of. The night I confronted him, the room smelled of hospital soap and something metallic. I stood by his bedside, holding the printed statements in my hand. "Sam," I said softly. "Who is Elaine?" He turned his head slowly. For a moment, confusion flickered in his eyes. Then, something else, resignation. He didn't ask how I knew. He didn't deny it. He just closed his eyes and whispered, "Grace, please, not now." My throat tightened. "When, then? After you're gone? When I find out from someone else?" He said nothing. The silence between us stretched until the monitor's beeping felt deafening. Finally, he said, "I didn't mean for you to find out. I was trying to make things right for everyone." "Everyone?" I repeated. "You mean her?" He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. I left the room before the tears could blind me. For the next few days, I moved like a ghost. I still came to the hospital. Still held his hand when nurses passed by. But inside, I was hollowed out. I learned later, through a friend who worked at the insurance office, that he'd named that woman as a secondary beneficiary on one of his policies. The transfers were part of a separate fund, meant to support her living expenses. A mistress. Maintained through the same system that was supposed to save his life. There's no word for the kind of pain that mixes grief and betrayal. It's heavier than anger, quieter than rage. It's the sound of your heart breaking slowly, in real time. For days after that confrontation, I lived in two worlds. In one, I was the dutiful wife, signing discharge forms, speaking politely to doctors, updating relatives with calm efficiency. In the other, I was a stranger staring at the man I'd shared a bed with for decades, now realizing I'd never really known him at all. Every smile felt counterfeit. Every shared memory, our anniversary dinners, the vacations, the laughter, blurred into something that looked real from afar but cracked up close. It's strange how betrayal distorts time. Moments stretch longer than they should, and even the air feels heavier. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., standing in the kitchen with the refrigerator door open, not even remembering why I was there. The nurses kept saying how lucky Samuel was. "Your wife's always here, always caring." They didn't know that each time I changed his sheets or adjusted his pillow, I fought the urge to ask why. Why wasn't I enough? Why couldn't he face death with truth instead of secrets? 2 weeks later, he took a turn for the worse. The cancer had spread. His voice was barely a whisper. "Grace," he said one morning, his hand trembling in mine, "don't let anger eat you up." I remember looking at him, at the man who'd shared my dreams, my bed, my life, and wondering if he was asking for forgiveness or just release from guilt. I wanted to scream, "How dare you ask that of me?" But what came out was a whisper, "I don't even know who you are anymore." He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." It was the last real conversation we ever had. The morning he died, the hospital smelled like rain, damp and metallic. I remember the nurse's soft voice, the distant hum of machines being turned off, and the strange stillness that followed. They tell you grief hits like a wave. But for me, it was like standing in fog. Everything muffled. Everything slow. I went home to an empty house filled with the scent of his cologne still lingering on his coat. His slippers by the door. his toothbrush beside mine. I sank to the floor in the hallway and cried until my chest hurt. But when the tears ran dry, something else surfaced beneath them, an ache that wasn't just loss. It was betrayal, still burning quietly like a coal that wouldn't die out. The days after the funeral blurred together, condolences, flowers, polite smiles. People said things like, "He was such a good man," and "He adored you." I nodded, thanked them, and wondered if they would still say those words if they knew. Then came the letter from the insurance company. The final proof. A certified notice detailing the transfer of funds, one portion to me, another to Ms. Elaine Whitman. I stared at the page for what felt like hours. The betrayal had become official, stamped and signed. He had given her a piece of our life. Of my life. That night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by stacks of paperwork, the soft ticking of the wall clock echoing in the silence. I opened my laptop and began to search her name. Elaine Whitman. I didn't know what I expected to find, a face, a location, some explanation. But when her social media profile appeared, I froze. She was younger. Early 40s, maybe. Smiling in every photo. Sunlight in her hair. A yoga instructor, according to her bio. Based in the next town over. And in one photo, one from last Christmas, she stood in front of a small tree, holding a mug. The caption read, "Thank you, Sam, for making this year possible." I felt my stomach twist. I didn't message her right away. I just stared at that photo for days. At first, I told myself I needed closure. Then I realized closure was just another word for control, and I didn't have any. Not over Samuel's choices. Not over what she knew. Still, one morning, I drove to her town. The GPS led me to a small studio with pastel walls and a glass door. Through the window, I saw her leading a class, calm and graceful, as if she hadn't been part of the storm that destroyed my life. When the session ended, she smiled at me through the glass before realizing who I was. The color drained from her face. "Grace," she whispered when I walked in. "You shouldn't be here." "How do you know my name?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "He told me. About you. About everything." I stared at her. "Everything? Did he tell you he was dying?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "He told me. I didn't know what to do. I thought he'd leave you. I thought." I laughed, a sound that startled both of us. "He did leave me," I said. "He just waited until he was gone to finish the job." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I don't need your pity," I said. "I just wanted to see what kind of woman a dying man would lie for." Then I turned and walked out before she could say another word. That night, I couldn't stop shaking. My hands, my voice, even my breath trembled with a strange, hollow kind of rage. It wasn't about her anymore. Or even him. It was about everything I'd given, the years, the love, the caretaking, and how it all ended in a signature on a document that said I was worth half of his affection. But beneath that anger was something else, exhaustion. I realized I couldn't live inside bitterness forever. It would devour what little of myself I had left. So I did something that surprised even me. I called the insurance company the next day and asked to redirect his portion of the funds. They told me it wasn't possible, legally, the money belonged to the listed beneficiary. But mine wasn't bound. And so I made a decision that would change everything. I transferred every dollar of my share into a new account. Not hidden, not secret. I called it the Phoenix Fund. A place to help terminally ill spouses, especially those who'd faced betrayal, rebuild their lives with dignity. It wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. And in the quiet that followed, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Months passed. The house felt emptier, but not in the same unbearable way it once did. I started filling the silence, not with noise, but with purpose. The Phoenix Fund became more than an idea. It became a heartbeat. I spent my mornings answering emails from women who wrote things like, "My husband died last year. He left everything to his mistress. I feel like I'm grieving two deaths, his, and the truth." Each story hurt to read, because each one mirrored my own. But for every letter of heartbreak, there was also gratitude. They said my story gave them courage, to rebuild, to forgive, to live. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was dark and still, I would whisper into the silence, "Samuel, maybe this is what you wanted me to find. Not you, but strength." The first public event I hosted for the fund was small, a modest room at the community center, chairs in a circle, warm coffee in styrofoam cups. I didn't plan to speak. I was just there to listen. But when one of the women, a widow named Claire, broke down mid-sentence, something in me stirred. She said, "I don't know how to move on when my memories are poisoned." And before I could stop myself, I said, "Then stop trying to move on. Move through." Everyone turned toward me. "Pain doesn't disappear when you ignore it," I continued softly. "It changes shape. It becomes bitterness. But if you face it, really face it, it eventually becomes wisdom." Claire nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. That was the night the Phoenix Fund truly began. Not as charity, but as a community, of women rising from ashes that once buried them. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in Samuel's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed slightly, like it had been written long ago. "Grace. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And there's no way to explain what I've done without it sounding cruel. Elaine didn't steal me. I gave myself to her because she reminded me of the man I was before the illness, before fear turned me into a ghost of myself. She made me feel alive again, and that scared me. Because loving her meant betraying you, the one person who stood by me even when I didn't deserve it. I left her something not because I loved her more, but because she has no one. You have everyone, even if you don't see it yet. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you sooner. But I hope one day, you'll forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours. Samuel." I sat there for a long time after reading it. It didn't make sense of everything. It didn't erase the betrayal. But it shifted something inside me, just slightly. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a destination. Maybe it was a decision you had to keep making, over and over, until it finally stuck. One Sunday, nearly a year later, I found myself back in the same park where Samuel and I used to feed the ducks. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your breath visible. I sat on the bench and closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt free. And then I heard a soft voice behind me. "Mrs. Carter?" I turned. It was Elaine. She looked different, thinner, quieter, carrying her own kind of grief. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. I come here sometimes. He told me it was your favorite place." I nodded. "It was ours." She hesitated. "I got a letter too. From him." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who took something from me. I saw someone who'd lost something too. "What did he say?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "That he was sorry he made both of us love half a man." We stood there, quiet, the sound of the ducks filling the stillness. Then I said, "You know, he was right. But maybe that's what makes us stronger. We learned to love completely, even when he couldn't." Elaine's eyes filled with tears. "Do you hate me?" she asked. I thought about it. "I did," I said. "But hate's a heavy thing to carry. And I'm tired." We sat together for a while. Two women, bound by pain, untangling the same memory from opposite sides. When she finally stood to leave, she turned and said, "You're stronger than he ever knew." And I realized, she was right. That night, I lit a candle in the living room, not for mourning, but for remembrance. I placed Samuel's letter beside it and whispered, "I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I deserve peace." The flame flickered, soft and steady. And in that moment, I knew something had changed. Not just in me, but in the story I'd carried for so long. It wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about rebirth. Months later, the Phoenix Fund reached its first major milestone, enough funding to build a counseling center. We called it Grace House. Not after me, but after what the word means, unearned mercy. Every week, women gathered there, sharing stories, tears, laughter. And sometimes, in their faces, I'd catch glimpses of the woman I used to be, broken, but still breathing. I'd tell them, pain doesn't define you. What you build from it does. They'd nod, and I'd see it, that spark, that tiny flicker of light that once lived only in ashes. It's been 3 years now. The house is quieter, yes. But it's not lonely anymore. Every time I look at the framed photo on the mantel, Samuel smiling beside me on our wedding day, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude. Not for what he did, but for what it taught me. That love isn't about possession. That forgiveness isn't weakness. And that even when life burns you down to nothing, you can still rise. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is rebuilding a life so whole, so peaceful, so full of light, that the darkness has nowhere left to hide.